All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to our fourth Friday forum in where we will be discussing AAPI issues. Today we have the I'm so excited. We have three great counselors coming to talk to us. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves. I'm going to start to my left with Dina, and then go Dina, Gina, and Ranilla.
Hi everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. And I've had fun with the last three that I've been able to participate in and see. So it's been a lot of real learning that's been happening for me, and I just want to say thank you for being here. Um, I'm a counselor. I've been in the counselor for the district for almost 30 years now. I think it's going to be 30 years next year, I think. But I am the counselor for the district counselor for our students who are experiencing homelessness and our students who are in foster care. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to be in this space with you guys. A popcorn Gina.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I am truly humbled to be a part of this forum. And I think what we're going to do and what our district is doing to create this dialogue regarding all these issues that we're having as a community is so important. And just the fact that we're recording it and are able to replay it back again for others to see, I think it's important that we're able to join. I think these topics are so critical right now, especially during this time. And so I am really fortunate to be able to present with these two awesome ladies here tonight. And so Gina Malari, counselor at National City Middle School, and in the district, I've lost count, 1997. So I can't do the math that quickly. But anyways, welcome everybody. Welcome.
Hi, I'm catching up to Dina in terms of longevity in the district. My name is Ranilla Calderon McBuhat. I'm a counselor at Benita Vista High School, and it's my 27th year as a counselor. And I'm very humbled to be in the presence of all of you tonight, especially the co-presenters presenting the topic of race and immigration, especially during these times. I just want to mention that I am a product of the district. I'm a graduate of Montgomery High School, class of '87. Once an Aztec, always an Aztec. So I guess we can do the slides, or
You want me to?
yeah, let's go ahead and get that on there.
Thank you, Val.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
No.
All right.
Okay, so the topic we're presenting tonight is race and immigration, and we can go on to the next slide. So the first question is, and you can feel free to put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself, whatever you're comfortable with. Why do you think people immigrate?
Oh, I think people immigrate. For my parents, I know they immigrated for like the American dream that we all hear about. They wanted a better life for me and my brothers, and Brianna. So I think that's why some people immigrate.
And if I can also add that my parents immigrated as well. My father joined the Navy at the height of the Cold War, 1963, and he didn't bring my mom over until 1968. And thinking about the sacrifice that she did, as a Navy wife, having to leave her family and her support system in the Philippines to be with her husband. She had no one here. I mean, she met folks later that she became lifelong friends with, but just thinking about if I were in that situation, so she was willing to make that jump. My dad wanted to get out of the Philippines because he didn't feel there was opportunity for him.
I'm wondering how many in the room right now are from Navy families. Margaret, what's your story?
I don't really know my dad's story. I just know that my mom brought me here. And so I grew up here. Don't really know much about my dad, but I do know for sure that he was not in the Navy.
Yeah, I'm not a Navy brat either. My dad was he came with a professional way, and but interestingly enough, he and my mom had good careers in the Philippines, and then coming here, they had to give up those careers to start all over again. So my dad was a certified public accountant in the Philippines. So when he came here, he started as a bookkeeper. And my mom was a doctor, and when she came here, she just was not ever able to practice medicine because she would have had to go back to school. So when I've asked them, why did you come here? You had like careers over there, and it wasn't just any kind of career. It was pretty lucrative. That's considered lucrative over there. And their answer was, we couldn't foresee what it would be like for you guys, what those opportunities would be for you and your siblings once you go out there. And so just really needed to ensure that there was stability and there were opportunities for you and your siblings to have when you get older. And for them, immigrating here was never a permanent thing. It was supposed to be when I retire, I'm going to go back home, but it became a permanent thing, which in some ways it's sad because their dream was to go back and live their lives, live out the rest of their lives in the Philippines. But, they had children here. So those were those unforeseen sacrifices if in immigrating here, because their kids were not just Filipinos, they were Filipino American. Carla, are you a child of an immigrant?
I am. Well, my parents' family came from Mexico. But when you were mentioning about the Navy, I was thinking about my partner's family, whose dad brought his mom from the Philippines. And so it makes me think about just her life and leaving and not knowing anybody in the US. So she passed last year, so it actually makes me think about all of her sacrifice so that she could have a better life too.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Carla. I mean, that definitely, I don't know about you guys, but it hit an emotional key with me. So thank you, Carla.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, just growing up and not, when I was a kid, my siblings and we never really thought about, why my parents came here. We took everything for granted. And then as an adult, just reading up and learning about not just Asian American history, but Filipino American history, that's when I learned, wow, they really gave up a lot to come here. And for those that don't know, in terms of Filipino American history, the Philippines was a colony of the United States. And the Philippines is one of the largest group of immigrants to the United States. But then there's waves in immigration where they came here like during certain times, and there were certain times of American history where we weren't wanted as well. And so laws were passed to prevent intermarriage, not just for Filipinos, but for anyone of color. Laws were passed to prevent folks from living in certain parts of town, the practice of redlining, where like, for example, in Southeast San Diego, there's a huge African-American community, but that's because the lenders determine which communities they would want people of color in, and they also determine where they wouldn't want them. So that's why you don't see certain ethnic groups in certain areas of San Diego, because this is a very real thing, not just in San Diego, but all over the United States. And it's supposed to have been outlawed in the 60s, but a lot of that stuff still happens today. And again, in terms of waves of immigration, Dina mentioned that her parents came during the professional wave. That's usually done during post-1965, when the Immigration Act was signed. But prior to that, there were restrictive laws on immigration for Asians prior to 1965. So I just wanted to give some of that background, and also because of the colonial relationship with the Philippines and the United States, that's why we have a lot of, at least my generation, we're in our 50s, most of us, not all, our fathers were in the Navy because they were recruited, because we were a colony. And that is how the United States benefited, by having Philippine nationals join the military, and they brought their families here post World War II.
You know, one thing that my dad always told me, and I'm not sure how historically true it is, but my dad had always told me that when they were recruiting people for the Navy, that they still took like the top people, right? Because I think people have this image of the Philippines, and like they just like took everyone to be in the Navy and everyone to be nurses. And I remember, talking to my dad about like, why did he join the Navy? How did, what was the process like? And he always told me, that he had lots of friends who wanted to join the Navy because they wanted to come to America, but a lot of people got denied. And so that he said he just, I don't know, I don't think it was grades, but he passed the test, or he passed whatever he needed to do. And so I always want to debunk that stereotype that, everyone just joined the Navy to come and they were just taking everyone. It just makes me proud that my dad, joined the Navy and was able to come here for that.
Well, and my dad joined the Navy, and at that time, he was a steward, and so he was a chef or a cook, a steward in the kitchen, so cooking. And actually, his whole career, he stayed a steward, and he actually ended up working for the Admiral. And the Admiral loved him so much, he took him along with him all the way through. That's how our family was able to stay in San Diego, because he did work for, Admiral Kidd, Admiral Kidd Club down in Point Loma. So he worked for 2 generations of the kids, I guess KIDD.
It's just interesting that the common thread with reasons for people immigrating, regardless of what countries they're coming from, is that belief that the U.S. is like just has all of these opportunities and advantages, and not realizing that in coming here, there's a lot of things that are sacrificed, And so, but I think if in asking my parents, would they do it again in a heartbeat, they would, knowing what it is that they're going to give up just for their kids. So that's, it's that to me, that's a huge sacrifice if you're doing this for others, for your own children and not for yourself. So, and even just going back to the farm workers and the situation with our Chinese and Japanese American immigrants, it's a common thread that there is those beliefs that their life is going to be better once they come here.
Well, and I think also in visiting the Philippines a couple years ago, and just kind of visiting different parts of it, I'm just always so grateful to my father for the sacrifices that he made for our whole entire family, and how many generations that it's making a big difference for. And, it's interesting too that, some of the local Vietnamese restaurants, here, and I hear their stories, and they're just actually the first generation to come over here. But I don't know if some of you have gone to Pho Hype, right? Pho Hype over here in East Lake. Well, Kevin is actually the owner of it is actually first generation here, but he came on a boat when he was, he had to escape from Vietnam, and then he went to China, and then to the United States. But he was all but 10 years old with his sister, who was like 14, 15 years old. And then they had to find their way, stay in the camp, and then make their way over to the United States. And I said, how did they know you were even safe? And he said, I don't know. We just went to these camps, and people told us to find notes, like pieces of paper posted up. And then they would have to, they had money. And he was like so thankful that nobody like robbed them, because then they would have to call their families. It's kind of similar to what, the kids in the convention center are going through right now. But I think that what a great price and what a great cost it is for us, for that freedom and for that sacrifice of that better life. So it makes me cry. I just feel like, ah. And I even run into a lot of other Asians, up in the Bay Area, and they're fairly young. In my opinion, they're like maybe 19, 20, and they're working and going to school, and they're working like 12, 13, 14 hours, and then they're going to school after they're done working, almost staying up all night, all day for that sacrifice and living in one single room. So, I mean, I just think, that we're really like earning what it is to have that freedom and that different life, that opportunity. Yeah, it's a great sacrifice. It really is. So, Raynilla?
Yes?
Do you?
I can't hear you.
You want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, let's go to the next slide. And before we click play, just a little bit of background. This gentleman is the poet and British author Musa Okwonga, and he will be reciting a piece called The Migrant Manifesto. It's about 3.5 minutes long, and if we can just take some time to listen to his spoken word.
Can you hear it?
Guest workers. We have been called many names. Illegals, aliens, guest workers, border crossers, undesirables, exiles, criminals, non-citizens, terrorists, thieves, foreigners, invaders, undocumented. Our voices converge on these principles. We know that international connectivity is the reality that migrants have helped create. It is the place where we all reside. We understand that the quality of life of a person in the country is contingent on migrants' work. We identify as part of the engine of change. We are all tied to more than one country. The multilaterally shaped phenomenon of migration cannot be solved unilaterally, or else it generates a vulnerable reality for migrants. Implementing universal rights is essential. The right to be included belongs to everyone.
We have the right to move, and the right to not be forced to move. We demand the same privileges as corporations and the international elite, as they have the freedom to travel and to establish themselves wherever they choose. We are all worthy of opportunity and the chance to progress. we all have the right to a better life. We believe that the only law deserving of our respect is an unprejudiced law, one that protects everyone, everywhere. No exclusions, no exceptions. We condemn the criminalization of migrant lives. We affirm that being a migrant does not mean belonging to a specific social class, nor carrying a particular legal status. To be a migrant means to be an explorer. It means movement. This is our shared condition. Solidarity is our wealth. We acknowledge that individual people with inalienable rights are the true barometer of civilization. We identify with the victories of the abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement, the advancement of women's rights, and the rising achievements of the LGBTQ community. It is our urgent responsibility and our historical duty to make the rights of migrants the next triumph in the quest for human dignity. It is inevitable that the poor treatment of migrants today will be our dishonor tomorrow. We assert the value of the human experience and the intellectual capacity that migrants bring with them, as greatly as any labor they provide. We call for the respect of the cultural, social, technical, and political knowledge that migrants command. We are convinced that the functionality of international borders should be reimagined in the service of humanity. We understand the need to revive the concept of the commons, of the earth as a space that everyone has the right to access and enjoy. We witness how fear creates boundaries, how boundaries create hate, and how hate only serves the oppressors. We understand that migrants and non-migrants are interconnected. When the rights of migrants are denied, the rights of citizens are at risk. Dignity has no nationality.
Wow, that was very powerful, powerful words. Is there anything similar or different between your stories and the ones in the video? And what's the takeaway that you have from this video?
So I started getting a little teary because, it's being recorded, so I'm trying to like hold back a little bit. So with your guys' stories, you mentioned your dad's being around, and like I said earlier, I don't know who mine was. My mom came here for better opportunities too, and she had to sacrifice a lot. And to do that alone is just so admirable to me. And so I was listening to that video, and she kind of struggles the same way that I know my students of different nationalities struggled. She had to work jobs that weren't the best just to make sure that the food was on our table and to make sure that I was okay. And so that one hit a little hard. Yeah. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for what my mom has done and the sacrifices she made to make sure that we would have better opportunities and we would have a better life, because I'm here and I'm where I'm at today because of her. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story, Margaret. It really means a lot.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. You know, what I find interesting is my dad immigrated here, and he was married to my mom, and then of course over the next couple years everyone in my dad's family immigrated over, right? He brought over my grandma, my grandpa, my aunts and uncles. But I think what's interesting is like they never talked about race, any issues that they had. My entire family, with the exception of my dad, all worked at the Hotel del Coronado. My grandma was a maid. My grandfather worked in the elevator. My uncles were all chefs. So I'm sure at the Hotel Del, knowing about the Hotel Del now and where it's located, I imagine that they came across racism of some sort that the poet just mentioned. But not once in my entire life had any of them, my dad or my mom, ever talked to me about anything racist that ever happened to them. And so I kind of think Laura, I think it's because my parents are very Filipino and they don't talk about feelings or any of those kinds of things, right? Like we talk about saying I love you or I'm proud of you or all those kinds of things. I just think they didn't want to talk about hard topics. And you know, I always wonder because I know that I could remember that my grandmother at one point became the maid of the presidential suite. And so she would come into contact with all these, she would come home and say, like, the president stayed here and the first wife gave me like this. But then I just imagine, like, how did they really treat my grandmother? Right. Or, you know, my grandfather in the elevator. I think of him going up and down the elevator, but how did they really get treated? So, you know, I don't know why they never spoke about it. I could guess it was because they don't want to talk about anything hard.
I agree with you, Valerie, but I didn't never experience my parents talking about racism. And I think part of it is that they're just so grateful, you know, that to bring something negative into it would kind of smear that reality that they created about how good life is over here, you know. So I guess when I look at in comparison to how people are living in the Philippines, or you know, the lack of opportunities there, this is better than what that is, right? But at the same time, when I think of my parents saying home, they're not talking about home where they live right now. They're talking about home in the Philippines, and that must, you know, put a lot of sadness for them too.
That's a good point, Dina. Yeah.
I think that that's the biggest part of it, is that sacrifice. And, you know, I think the lack of understanding that, you know, I'm an immigrant. And I don't know why I'm getting all emotional about this, but I think that that's the part that needs to be understood. And with the video of the, you know, I put on the chat that I love the part that dignity has no nationality. Because when you talk about immigration and you talk about United States and you talk about the sacrifices that were made before they even came here and the travel that they had to make, whether that was on foot or boat or that airplane, and then when they were here, they were away from their mother country. I mean, that's huge. And some so young. I mean, and we're seeing it today. That's what's so trippy to me, is so, like, I just feel like, and these kids, do you know that great sacrifice that their parents had to let go of them? I know not one of us here as mothers could ever let our children grow, but that sacrifice of how much more greater this country is going to afford them the opportunity, that dignity that we have to give to them is so important. It's so important. We all know it. We all know, just whether our parents verbalize it or not. That was, you know, that's like so great. And you know, that dignity part of it, I mean, so important. Sorry guys, didn't mean to get all Marvin started.
No need to apologize. You're being real.
I had one of my students join, and then I just, oh, here he is.
Oh, right there.
There he is. Hi, Xavier.
Hi.
I'm glad to see that you're joining us today.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome. You know, I'm hearing these stories, and I just wonder, you know, I put in the chat, I wonder if some of it is we accept that treatment because in some ways we feel like, you know, yeah, we're grateful. And so we just accept being treated less than. It's not our place to complain because we should just be grateful that we're here in America. I mean, I see it in my in both my parents, actually, and as a community. We don't, now I think this generation is has the courage to organize and fight back, if you will. But from my observations of like even our generation a little bit, and from our parents' generation, very just docile, and horrible things been happening, and we're still silent and like invisible. So yeah, we share these stories, and we're actually reading these scholarship applications right now. Our own kids in our district living with a relative because their mom or their dad is working somewhere else, and they don't want to be a burden, so they have a job so they can provide for their own meals. And it's really, first of all, it's admirable, but secondly, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And to think about, you mentioned, Gina, all the kids that are there in the convention center. I can't even, we have a couple teachers who work there on the weekends and after hours, and I can't even bring myself to imagine they're without their parents. They're there. They're in jail, basically. So anyway, yeah, this is a tough thing to think about.
So I think this topic really elicits a lot of emotion and is very loaded. And so I think there's a lot to process. And I know we've got other slides, right, Ranilla, to present next. So let's hold on to those feelings, because I think the other things that we've only got 6 slides, but I think it's very loaded.
Yeah, just a few more.
Yeah, and we're just gonna go with it, but put the number in the chat if you're look on the screen and see which one was your parent. I think it's really important for us, or if it's not even in there, type it in there. What is your immigrant story? And I'd like for that to be recorded. I think it's important, because I believe that this is part of our history that's being recorded, right? So make sure you type that in there. So it covers a lot of the spectrum from didn't know my grandparents or have never lived close to them, to number 8, I was not born in this country, and Xavier, I feel sad that there's a lot of hate in this world. And I think that it's super important that part of it is having this discussion about how that hate started. And does anyone want to share about a little bit more in depth of what they put on the chat? Want to share an experience? Or
it's when I was lucky enough that my maternal grandmother lived with us for a few years before going back to the Philippines, and she had passed away there. But the time that she spent with our family, I was already in college, so I didn't even really see her that much. And I think about the loss of that whole generation of like that there's just that divide of that grandparent grandchild relationship that will never be bridged because you live in different areas, you live in different parts of the world. And there's so and in seeing my son and my nieces and nephews with my parents, I'm like, man, I missed out. I missed out on that experience with my own grandparents because truly there is a different relationship that my nieces and nephews and my son have with my parents. And I tell my son, you really need to take advantage of knowing who they are because this is half of your life. And when they pass away, I don't know what to tell you because I only know what they shared, and what they shared isn't that much. And usually, our stories our stories are verbal. They're not things that were written. These are things that our oral histories, our own personal oral histories. And I think about the loss of not having that for me. And I think our children having, if their grandparents are still around, really taking advantage of that, and kind of explaining to them why their grandparents are the way they are, why they say the things that they say and do the things that they do, because they just grew up in a time that was so different, right? And then they come here and they have to be very much more defensive and protective. And so even to allow themselves to be vulnerable with their grandchildren or even with their children it wasn't an option because they had to stay strong to survive. And so when my son doesn't understand why his Lolo and Lola do what they do, I have to explain that to him because he doesn't get it. It's not something that he grew up with. It's not something that he sees they're his friends' grandparents doing or what have you. But I tell Malik, I said, you need to talk to your Lolo and Lola and ask them these things that you're asking me, because when they're not here, I won't be able to answer that for you. They have to do that for you. And to be very patient with them because they are who they are, but they brought with them a whole wealth of culture and values that you're never going to see me, or you're not going to get from me because I didn't grow up that way. So there's so much beauty in that oral history that our parents can give to our children, because I missed that with my own grandparents.
Brianna wants to share her story.
Just say it.
Go ahead, Brianna.
My mom and I were talking about how I talked to my grandma all the time when I was in college because I missed her.
And what did you take?
Okay, I didn't take it. It was a requirement. So I had to pick a language, and obviously it was Filipino because I didn't want to take Spanish. It was kind of hard. But I took it, and I speak and I understand, and now I can communicate better with my grandma and my grandpa, even though my grandpa yells at me all the time for how I'm at college. But it's okay.
And I think that, Dina, I was very close to my grandmother. She lived with us too. And I saw Gina's comment about them being grumpy. Like I could see my grandfather like that. But, Brianna, my parents live in Guam. And so Brianna we see them once a year, but with the advent of my mom finally figuring out how to use a cell phone, and Brianna,
Facebook.
oh yeah, she uses Facebook. Brianna gets to talk to her all the time, and I know it makes my dad happy because my dad will email me and say, oh my gosh, Brianna and your mom they're talking. And whenever they come for a week, I have to order TFC for the month. And then Brianna and her, they sit on the couch and watch TV. And it's interesting though, because my mom and I didn't have a relationship like that. Like I don't know how many of you are, but I feel like they immigrated here, they were working, they were doing all that kind of busy. And, my mom never went to my games. She never did any of that stuff. So I kind of get a little jealous when I hear that Brianna gets to talk to my mom all the time. And I think now my mom realizes that she wasn't doing that, because she does send a little message every day now, and so, but yeah, I think it's good.
She's crying.
I'm not crying. But I do think that, I saw Laura say that, the kids who have their grandparents around are very lucky for that. So I just wanted to make sure Brianna shared, but then she made me cry.
And plus, okay, no, the only reason why I'm the only grandchild, so of course they're gonna love me. So
and who wouldn't love Brianna?
And
right?
I get spoiled, so
Okay, I'm pressing you.
Yeah, I just, I just think about that. Oh, go right ahead. I'm sorry. Who was sharing? I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was saying that was so cute. But since I'm on, it's Claire. My story similar to Val, where a family member was in the Navy and then petitioned family member after family member. I would say on my end, I feel like my family there was no like outright racism, but there were definitely a lot of biases, just even talking about different areas of the Philippines, oh, where are you from? Right? Like when I introduced my boyfriend's now husband to my family, my mom's brother was like, what area of the Philippines are you from? And he's like, oh, I'm not Filipino. And he looked at him up and down and was like, it's okay, you'll pass. Right? But there were a lot of biases that I felt like my family would say, like about different people who looked a certain way and so on. And so I always remember just thinking like, just because they look a certain way, why is that the generalization? And I grew up in San Jose, and there was just, like the street I lived on was very diverse. And so I don't know, I don't want to say blind to it because I knew that there were differences, but I would say like there were certain biases that I was trying to understand that my family kind of said as we were growing up, and tying to oral stories that I feel like it's so important to share in the classroom, like what our families and cultural traditions are, because then it allows the kids, it allows the kids to connect with the teacher. And it just, to me, it's really important to build that connection, with them. Because like, hey, I'm more than just your teacher. I'm a person. I have this background. And I feel like that's another reason why they connect with me.
I do the same thing, Claire, with my students. I share pieces of my life that pertains to their experiences, and it does build for stronger connection. And last week I had shared that I didn't grow up in a predominantly Filipino community, and so when I see my Filipino students, I'm just like so ecstatic because I felt like I missed out on even that, and so yeah, definitely sharing pieces of your life, pieces of your families, to make that connection is so critical, and also sharing that there are biases that we hold, biases that may have come from the way we grew up and the values that are so different that our parents brought here with us, that may not be what it is here. Like I was just thinking about what you were saying, Claire, with stereotypes and all of that. I shared last week that my I didn't invite one of my uncles to my wedding because he and my husband and I purposely got married at Vegas. so that we can invite very few people. And I didn't invite my uncle, who I respected, because he told my mom, if he's gonna marry a black guy, why does he have to be so dark? So yeah, sorry, you're not gonna be on the invite list. But you know, and in looking at that, he didn't realize that that was a very racist attitude and value that he had. And looking at it, it's because that is what he grew up with in the Philippines, you know. And so I couldn't continue to not respect him because he is my mom's oldest brother. I had to understand what was that perspective about and confront him. We eventually talked about what that was and why he wasn't invited to the wedding, that I felt disrespected by what he said. And you know, it's so funny because I told him, Uncle Joe, you're darker than my husband. I don't understand why you said that. You know, and so, but it is, those are the values that he grew up with in the Philippines that he brought here. Those were values that were accepted in the Philippines, but they're unacceptable here. And so, you know, there was never that transition for him to allow himself to experience something that's different than what he grew up with.
And Dina, I think that that's part of that system or that cultural thing that we all grew up with, you know. Don't go outside, you're gonna get too dark. Okay, and so what? What's the matter with that, you know? And I think that that's the part of the bridging part of it, of, you know, from the colonization in the Philippines, from the Spaniards, and just all that history that, I mean, is a deeper topic, right? From later on, but the understanding part of it, and I'm glad you come to that part of it, you know, where you're understanding it from, you know, their perspective. And yes, I do have some, you know, relatives that are, right, darker than, you know, some African Americans, and I'm like, come on, man, you know, don't go there, you know. So, but I think that that's all part of it, and coming to that understanding of their perspective of why they think like that. I think for me, that's where as I go through the social media and read different things, because, you know, for me, it's just, I'll just be mad about it, you know. But now I'm getting to this point where let me think about their perspective and understand that, right? And where they're coming from and what they went through, and, you know, just the history. You would think that I would still, you know, going through this whole thing and growing up here, that I was just like, sometimes I'm not patient enough to, you know, hear their perspective, only because I'm like, hey, that's not what it's about. And to do this, who was I talking to? I was talking to another counselor in the district, where sometimes I feel like I'm just like tired of always having to educate, you know? And that's a piece of it where I'm like, but this dialogue is really good for us to have and to continue having. So.
I just wanted to just share one last thing, Gina, just to kind of talk about about why that shift happened for me, because I could have stayed really angry and just been angry until he passed away. Was my mom. When I was at UCLA, we were trying to we had this, we were having petitions for the redress and reparation for Japanese Americans. And I was asking my parents to sign the petition, and my mom was like, no. I said, well, why not? She said, you don't know what those Japanese did in the Philippines. And I was like, wow, you know, I didn't figure it out until she said that. That was when I had to say, I need to see this from her perspective, because that's her life story. And even though I argued with her that those are not the same folks who were placed in the concentration camps, your mom. These are Japanese Americans. They're citizens of the United States. And she said, it doesn't matter. They were in the Philippines. They did what they did, and I saw it. And that's really, for me, was the big shift in how I need to see, how I need to react with my anger, and see where I need to direct that. It doesn't mean that I wasn't angry when I'm looking at these injustice. It just means that for me, if I look at that perspective, then I know how to talk to that person. You know, I'm not going to accept it, but I have to find a way to try to connect, to see if there's any way that you know, we can get through this. But yeah, that was a huge aha for me when my mom said that. It was big. It was very big.
And Dina, if I could add to that, you know, my brother-in-law is Chinese, right? American Chinese. And when my sister started dating him, oh my gosh, it was a big to-do in our family. It was so unforgivable. And so only until I got older did I understand that my parents and my grandparents went through 2 wars, the Japanese War and the Chinese War, and they were running from them and hiding and trying to, like, you know, be safe and save their lives from all these people. So when we really talk about all our stories of immigration and why we immigrate here and how that even happened, hey, it's just like mind blowing to me that, you know, even in our generation, our parents were experienced that. They saw it. And you're absolutely right. I think, you know, and like moving forward, I think that that's a great way of really like understanding that immigration part of it for people. Like even the Europeans came over here because they were being persecuted, right? Right? And so everyone who's come here has always, you know, for some reason or another, wanted that opportunity of not having to experience that. And yet, you know, I just hope we're not going to revert back to that or feel that, you know, it's only for certain people, not to, you know, have that life of freedom of from persecution. And being immigrants, you know, even though we're generations down the line, we need to like keep moving forward with creating a better culture and country of understanding all the beautiful differences and where we all came from. I think, and that's really, really important to moving forward. So do we want to continue on with the slides, or does anybody else have anything on this? Yeah. Okay. So here's what's important. I think this is a great segue. Do you agree, Dina and Manila, to watch this short little video here?
You know, this video is not that long, and I think it speaks to the big picture of what immigration is here in the United States, and I think it's worthwhile listening to it. What do you think, Ranilla?
Yeah, before you hit click, Valerie, I'm going to put a resource sheet that Gina and myself have put together. And it does have this video and another video that we couldn't fit in today's presentation that you can watch on your own time, as well as other articles about anti-Asian immigration, and then the Asian Americans documentary series on PBS. It's a 5-part series, very worthy to watch, as well as the documentary on Filipino American history in the United States. So that's something that I just put in the chat, and you can just save that to your Google and read and watch it at your own leisure. So if we could go ahead and take some time to watch this video.
Now, can you make the window, the screen a little bigger for it? If not, if it's gonna throw everything off, that's okay.
Tina, I didn't hear you. Sorry.
I said, can you make the screen just a little bigger? But if it's gonna throw everything off, don't worry about it.
No, I'm gonna enlarge. Were you guys able to hear it though?
No.
Oh no. Okay. Okay, let's work on sound first, Val.
Let's start in 1790.
Can I get a thumbs up if you could hear it?
Limited U.S.
Oh, we don't hear anything.
To officially favor white people.
I'm an awful DJ, apparently. Do I need to I wasn't sharing the right screen. Do you need me to start again? Okay, I'm going to start again.
This is a story about
Okay,
U.S.
thumbs up.
immigration
Can we hear?
policy. The goal has always been to identify which people to welcome and which to keep out. Let's start in 1790. The first immigration law passed limited U.S. citizenship to any free white person. The law thus excluded people from almost anywhere outside of Europe, not to mention enslaved Africans and Native Americans who'd been living on the land for centuries. As immigrants of color began trickling into the country despite such restrictions, U.S. politicians moved again to officially favor white people. In 1882, Chinese were prohibited from coming here. And in 1924, Congress instituted national origin quotas. More than 100,000 visa slots were reserved each year for people coming from Northern Europe, while people from Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world had tiny allocations. Because migrants generally follow the example of family members and acquaintances who've gone before them, Europeans dominated the immigrant flow year after year after year. Those national origin quotas stayed in place until 1965, when they were finally abolished as racist and discriminatory. Under the Immigration Act of 1965, priority was given instead to immigrants who had spouses, parents, siblings, or other family members already in the U.S. Some politicians thought this family unification policy would still favor white people because they were more likely than non-whites to have U.S. relatives. But they miscalculated. By 1965, Europeans were largely content to stay put. They were no longer lining up in large numbers to move to America. It was a different story in the developing world. People there were increasingly eager to escape poverty and war or seek economic opportunity in America. That's where the long lines began to form. For every student or worker who got a visa to come to the U.S. from Africa, Asia, or Latin America, there were many family members back home who wanted to follow. This is what President Trump refers to derisively as chain migration, and it's become an explosive issue. The foreign-born share of the U.S. population has risen from 5% to 13.5%, with nearly 9 of 10 new immigrants arriving from countries outside Europe. President Trump wants to move to a merit-based system where immigrants with the skills and training most needed in the U.S. are favored over people looking to reunite with family members. Such a shift, however, would mark a sharp departure from what has been the prevailing pattern of migration throughout the country's history. Tom Jelton, NPR News.
Thank you for watching that. And, you know, the video is a few years old. We no longer have that president. You know, there's a lot of good information that was shared about anti-immigration laws and how things really changed, especially in San Diego post-1965 and for America as well, in terms of 20,000 people a year from Asian countries being allowed to immigrate to the United States. And a lot of them were professionals from the other countries, and a lot of them were there to sponsor their families to come over to the U.S. and have a better life. So a lot of us have maybe shared some of that same type of story. We have those commonalities. And then I know that for my mom is a post-65 immigrant, but my dad was pre-65, but he was part of the military wave. And again, that's a result of the colonial relationship that the United States had with the PI. But I think it was great to hear everybody's stories and sharing today. I know it was emotional for some, and it does hit home because, you know, these are things that we don't really talk about. Maybe because we just never grew up talking about it, and it's good to have these conversations, especially with what's been happening in the news with the hate crimes.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Dina, Ranilla, and Gina, for facilitating tonight's conversation. I appreciate the three of you, and am grateful to have the three of you in my life. So thank you again. And that's the end of the recording. I'm going to just press stop, and then